you so much. Thank you to everyone in attendance. Oh, I need to get my co-host privileges back. Maybe Liana, you have them and you can do the slides for us. Thank you all for being here again. My name is Ben Papadopoulos. I'm from the University of California, Berkeley. And I just wanted to start off by saying that it's been such a pleasure to organize this conference and now to see it come to fruition while I'm trying to write my dissertation, struggling to write my dissertation. And I'm here with two of my really brilliant colleagues today. And I'm from the University of Southern California, Mercedes and Liana. And we just wanted to share some of our wisdom as Spanish instructors, some things that we've learned, and provide some resources to everyone in the room, and share actually an activity that we have created for you all to sort of take as a takeaway from this talk today. So let's get started. Can you put this slide? Thank you so much. So we just wanted to start by sort of identifying some of the terms that we're going to be using and why we use them and how they apply to the Spanish language, which is very particular and very gendered, as we know. So we can say that the term non-binary is an umbrella term that we use and a lot of people use to refer to those who do not conform to the traditional masculine-feminine gender binary in some way, shape, or form, as stated by them. As this comes to Spanish, when we say non-binary Spanish, we're just talking about any linguistic forms that are not strictly masculine or feminine within such a binary system and can refer to people of other or all genders. For instance, the word la persona, even though it has a feminine gender, is used for reference towards everyone. And so we try to identify those forms as well as innovative forms like the e-gender, the x-gender, other genders, pronouns that people are using when we talk about non-binary Spanish. And important to note here that just because someone uses the pronoun ella, for example, it does not mean that they are non-binary. We can't exactly infer someone's gender identity from the language they use. Language gives space. Language is also perceived as neutral as well as inclusive. And so really it's a dialogue that's about language and identity that goes just beyond the forms that we use. So statistics show in the United States that 1.2 million Americans identify as non-binary, which to have such a statistic is impressive in number. And we know that gender is a very unavoidable issue in the Spanish language classroom, and that the language, as it is prescriptively, just does not have the capacity to express non-binary identities. You can't get past one sentence, or you probably can't even get through the sentence without making a gendered reference. And we know that all students benefit from a lesson in gender diversity more generally in society, and exposure to the use of different gendered forms in different contexts to have a cultural sensitivity around those issues. So why teach non-binary Spanish? I don't have to explain that to any of us here, thank goodness. But still, it must be said, some of the themes of the conference have touched on these points. Teaching non-binary Spanish uplifts gender diverse students by validating their identities and supporting their representation in the Spanish language, which is crucial to their mental health. And there are studies like this one that show, just as Wes said before, that the cycle of gendering and misgendering that you get in such a gendered language, so much more gendered than English, is 10 times worse. We can't even put a number to it. It's hard to quantify. And these languages, which we are hearing about in this session, Spanish, Catalan, and in some of the others, are among the most gendered languages in the world. So one misconception that I want to clear up from some research that I have done personally is that a lot of instructors will come to me and say, but isn't that confusing to the students? Or isn't that kind of language confusing to them? Doesn't it interrupt their education in grammatical gender and their formation in gender agreement, for instance? And I actually have done some research to show that students are not confused by it when you introduce it to them, even at a basic level, even just throwing in a few examples here and then in activities, just one adjective in an E form. They come to understand the agreement system and they actually perform it even at a beginner level in beginner courses. So we want to follow on that with some other empirical research, this time from my two colleagues, my two co-presenters, who did a host of studies at the University of Southern California and found some encouraging results. Do we have the other slide? Thank you so much. I'm sorry, I'm not here to do it.
Yes, we do. Thank you. Thank you, Ben. So I'll be addressing a few of our findings on the surveys that we conducted at USC, and we'll also discuss some of the resources available for those who learn or teach Spanish. So between 2019 and 2022, we conducted a study among the intermediate level Spanish learners at USC to study their attitudes towards the use of direct non-binary language in the classroom. We surveyed about 160 students in our classrooms, and at first, an anonymous survey, pre-test survey with a set of questions aimed at observing students' attitudes towards including non-binary Spanish in the classroom was administered. And we asked our students if they were familiar with the non-binary pronouns in English, then in Spanish, if they were aware of the struggles of LGBTQ+ and gender non-conforming communities. We also asked if they believe that college-level textbooks in English and Spanish should include non-binary language, that is direct non-binary language. And afterwards, we introduced a set of activities focused on expanding students' understanding of LGBTQ+ and gender non-conforming communities and experiencing real-life applications of the direct non-binary Spanish language in the classrooms as well. So these ACTful IPA style activities included reading comprehensions, comprehension texts, some information on legislation and struggles of gender non-conforming individuals in the US and Spanish-speaking countries. And afterwards, students watched a video interview with a non-binary Argentinian who shared their struggles and thoughts on identity, law, and gender bias. And the video was followed with by comprehension questions and discussions on identity, normativity, and inclusivity. And finally, students were provided with a brief introduction to gender-inclusive language, after which they completed a series of tasks that illustrated the use of a direct non-binary language. And in the post-activity survey, students were asked one more time what they thought of using non-binary language in the classroom, whether they gained a better understanding of the struggles of the LGBTQ+ communities, and how difficult it was to use non-binary Spanish in the classroom. So at first, students were hesitant about all of this. They were anticipating lots of difficulty when using non-binary Spanish. I'm only going to address a few of our findings. So the majority of students anticipated that it would be very difficult to use Spanish. In fact, we got comments such as, it's already hard to learn Spanish grammar, don't add any more. However, after using this language in the classroom, most students, over 56%, said that it was not difficult at all to use Spanish, non-binary Spanish, which shows a dramatic shift since in the previous surveys, the majority anticipated it would be very difficult to use non-binary Spanish. And here are some comments that they mentioned and they left for us. Non-binary pronouns are just as valid as binary pronouns. They should be taught at the same time as the binary pronouns so that they aren't isolated. When they are taught separately, it others them. And another one, we live in a world where everyone wants to be treated equally no matter their gender, and this should be respected for everyone and should become common knowledge that it is the right thing to do. So we were very inspired.
Liana, you muted yourself.
Oops. Sorry about that. So I was saying that it was very important for us to hear our students' opinions. And because we approach the inclusion of direct non-binary language through the lens of the principles outlined within the multiliteracies framework in regards with the learners' diverse backgrounds and experiences, and because we believe that it is our responsibility, as it has been said several times today, as educators to address these issues in our classrooms, to include issues related to social justice, equity, and inclusion in our classrooms, we started using non-binary language, direct non-binary language in our classrooms as well. And based on our experience and our findings, after having examined all the literature available on the topic and having spoken with the members of non-binary communities and LGBTQ+ communities, these are some of the recommendations that we have come up with. Of course, this is not a Bible. This is based on our experience. And we recommend that instructors begin by including pronouns in all print media, such as their email signatures or their websites or in their Zoom meetings. And we also suggest starting the very first class by greeting students using inclusive language, for example, in Spanish, muy buenos días, chicos, chicos, y chiques. And instructors might also want to consider beginning with a warm-up activities when students are given an opportunity to use pronouns. For example, introducing an activity on an imaginary Spanish-speaking family where one of the members is non-binary. And this will allow students to both familiarize themselves with the non-binary pronouns and ask questions about it without having to reveal their own preferred pronouns if they choose not to do so. We also suggest that instructors address unintentional mistakes, for example, misgendering and or not knowing how to use non-binary language. We ourselves constantly correct ourselves when speaking Spanish, and the members of the non-binary communities are very understanding of our mistakes and very open to correct us and allow for mistakes, right? So we suggest that instructors also select resources that feature or are created by the members of LGBTQ+ communities who either express their views of gender, sexuality, identity, or simply discuss topics such as their profession and hobbies. And these kind of activities open the door to understanding misconceptions and myths regarding gender nonconforming individuals. And students can also benefit from reflections on heteronormativity. And to initiate these potentially very challenging conversations, instructors may invite students to reflect on their own school's practices. For example, how are people depicted on the school's website or in their textbook? And yes, and so similarly, students can reflect on identity, sexuality, gender, analyze how language shape identity and gender, and compare their native languages to Spanish as well. Additional resources can be designed to take this conversation, additional assignments, can be designed to take these conversations outside of the classroom and engage students with their own environments. We offer a few resources today. For example, this book was published recently. It focuses on gender inclusive language, critical race theory, teaching heritage speakers, representing Black and Afro-Latinx communities in the classroom, and so on. The article that we contributed addresses teaching direct non-Spanish, non-binary Spanish in the classroom. Another, I skipped one. Another book that we suggest that you explore in July 2024 that we authored is a free digital textbook. It's not a textbook, free digital grammar book that is also available in a print format. It's geared at intermediate and advanced learners. It includes not only non-binary Spanish, but also both the second person pronoun. And it's suitable for independent study or use in different types of courses, such as heritage learner courses, OER courses, and so on. And we are very inspired by the results of our research, and we encourage you to use this book in your classrooms. And I'm speaking too slowly, so I'm going to move to the next slide. More resources, Ben.
We'll just go over these quickly. We will leave these slides for you all here. So this is our old webpage at USC from the conference last year. This is a page by one of our colleagues, Silvia Rivera Alfaro. This is a downloadable resource. And then my project we introduced on the next slide has a grammar of Spanish. And now with the time we have, maybe Mercedes can introduce the activity that we will leave you all with.
So let's see if we can do that in 1 minute. Liana, you want to move to the activity per se. So one of the important things that we wanted, actually, you probably want to go to the next one directly. We wanted to convey to is that it's not enough with speaking about this once in class. It's perfect. I mean, you do an activity where you talk about the challenges of the community and you may address it, but we also tend to see in some school, in some departments, in some universities that it happens once over the semester and then it's left on the side. And what we were trying to do with this activity, and actually the easiest way is you can use the QR code to open it and then just check on what we're doing, is to try to find a way to find the voices into whatever activity you're doing in the class or whatever topic you're addressing in the class. Not necessarily starting the conversation from, let's talk about the non-binary community, the struggles, but actually to see them like active members of our society, right? They're musicians, they are artists. So why not bring their experiences in that way? So this particular activity that we're sharing with you today is an activity on music. We start, it has the form of any IPA that you may do in your classes, pushing the 3 modes of communication and giving students the opportunity to practice the 4 basic language skills. There's a reading, there's listening, there's a conversation, students are doing research and they're sharing the research. But if you want to go to the next slide, Liana, the next one. As we introduce different artists from the Latin community, we included a specific musician who is called, can you go otra vez a la de antes? Here we go, who is called Marie Curie, and there's a reading about Marie Curie and the work as part of the musicians. And then, Liana, can you go to the other one? The unit goes more specifically to the experience of Marie Curie as a member of the LGBTQ plus community, also as someone that identifies as, ¿puedes pasar a la siguiente? As both mujer trans y persona no binaria. So a series of activities that engage the students into the conversation, not only about the non-binary community, but also through the topic of music. And I think I'm going to leave it there. Otherwise, we're taking someone else's time so they can just look at the activity on their own time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mercedes, Liana, and Ben. We'll go right over to Jhonatan in the interest of time. Thank you so very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. Hi, everybody. It's me again. I'm Jhonatan Henao-Muñoz, and this is the presentation of this wonderful conference. So my presentation is called Building from and for Diversity, a repository for inclusive Spanish language. As I told you before, I'm from the University of Arizona. I'm an assistant professor of practice there. And here we have some interesting things that I want to share with you. So starting from the beginning, where is my click? Is here. So if you have any question, any doubt during the presentation, please feel free to scan the code or use the link that I drop on the chat, and I can address it later in the discussion, or later I can email you back with a response or with the comment. So now, first of all, this project exists because of the support of the LGBTQ Institute, the Frankie Honors College of the University of Arizona, General Education at the Center for Latin American Studies, that are the big supporters of this initiative, because we advocate for diversity in our institutions, but the organized point to participate in diversity, we don't have any other voices. So thanks for them for believing in this project that is in progress. And this project has 4 main purposes. First of all, identify patterns of use and form of speakers' attitudes towards inclusive Spanish language. Also, draft an inclusive Spanish language grammar. So this is based on data, what we have from native speakers of Spanish in the United States, in Latin America, and the Spanish-speaking countries, and is focused on both the practitioners and the learners. So the people who teach it, the people who use it, and the people who are learning it. as additional or heritage language learner. Also develop multiliteracies, multimodal approach instructional materials, in other words, open educational resources, and design best practices for to implement inclusive Spanish language booklet in Hispanic serving institutions. So adding the linguistic service aspect of the inclusive Spanish language. This project has a branch project that is supported by the Center for Educational Resources in Cultural, Language, and Literacy of the University of Arizona, in which the main focus is creating open educational resources to add within the heritage language classrooms and the additional language classroom of Spanish. So this is a big project. It's not done by my own, is because this is a collaborative project with different voices, different perspectives, and it's thanks to Daniela, David, Luz Adriana, Julie, and Julia that this project is going on. Some of them have been my collaborators or my research assistants, data analysts. So we have a collaborative group here to build the repository and produce lately the materials. So as everybody here, mostly we understand Spanish somehow, or we have heard it before, and we have hola todos, it work, hola todas, it work, but some people may feel vulnerable, toxic masculinity, fragile masculinity, telling you hola todas when we have more women in the classroom or more self-identified women in the spaces. We have hola todas y todas work. It was like, oh, but it's quite long. What about hola tot? We don't have the pronunciation for the at. Hola todex sounds interesting, but it seems to happen in some countries, but not in others, in some contexts and not in others. And we have todes. It's pronounceable. You can feel included from one side from the other. We can use the three of them, todos, todas, y todes, and even todex. However, as we may know, because of Real Academia Española, we have normative use of language. And when I say we, they argue that, okay, the masculine include the feminine in all the contexts in which we are making genetic statements. However, people, the speakers, the users, they don't feel like that. That's why we have this kind of conversation towards gender and language. So from a sociolinguistic point of view, variety matters. This work in your corresponding context. So there is no such a thing as a correct use, but is a variety of a form in X context or situation. So this is a generic question. In your language classroom, heritage language classroom, additional language classroom of Spanish, have you ever had a queer student, non-binary student, or trans student, or even a simple student, you don't know the gender identity, which is totally fine. But we have some students that, regardless of their gender identity, they may not or they don't fit on the binary category. So how have you support them? Here we have applied linguists, educators, linguists that we know somehow how to support the situation, but in general, people, they don't have a huge background or a representative background in linguistics, applied linguistics, of gender matters. So that's why here we have this kind of conference, this kind of support at the repositories, or this kind of support of open educational resources we create, we develop for them, with them and for them, with the idea. So in today's agenda, we have the hola and triggering questions about the purpose of the inclusive Spanish inclusive language. I will tell you a little bit about how did we reach here, the what, so what, and what now of the project, this repository of inclusive Spanish language, and strategies for pedagogical and administrative administration, and opportunities of challenges of any single project we have. So this idea was born like more or less in 2019, 2020, in which I was teaching, when we was Spanish and French the same year, and I have students that, okay, they realize that textbooks are outdated. They are not with the current trends, nor they are not inclusive at all, considering not only the Spanish varieties we have, but also what about the traditional roles that they are imposed within the books in a more modern world right now. So the student was complaining about it from the part of the text and happy with the initiatives I had in that moment of, why I have to follow the book if I myself don't believe in the book. So here we have, I create some videos about inclusive language in French, some materials about inclusive language in Spanish, because as a native speaker of Spanish and a queer person, I say, oh, I use this one more or less, but I didn't know because, you know, unless you interact with other people, how do they refer to themselves? It's like quite interesting when people say, but I'm a they, I'm a them. How do you do this in Spanish? And I say, okay, that's a good question. Here we are, the response. So this was inspired by those students in the past, and also because if you are, I don't know if you know Twitter, right now is X, whatever is the platform, is super toxic. And we have many comments somewhere else about language use, regardless of the understanding of grammar that person have or the linguistic phenomena they have. So like people, they look for what we have at the beginning in this conference, people trying to use science, in quotation marks, to argue their hate, their bigotry towards a natural phenomena like language variation, language change. So people trying to discourage the use of Spanish language, Spanish inclusive language. And here we have that the institution that support the normative use of Spanish is there supporting those bigotry comments. However, we as a linguist, we know that we describe language, we describe patterns, we understand language variation, we understand language change. Of course, by including our inclusive Spanish language initiatives, it doesn't mean that everybody's going to use it, everybody has to use it. However, everybody can be somehow represented within the materials we use. And considering that La Real Academia Española is only for the purpose of documentation of language. So, but we have some other discussion there. Also, there are some people that they are worrying or wondering about the pronunciation, which is totally fine, and others that are arguing again, people is ignorant because they use non-normative forms. And still of that, there is like the pattern of the response of the Real Academia that is, okay, we are invalidating non-binary uses because they don't exist, quotation mark, in the Spanish language, or basically they argue that it's not natural. It's like, okay, come on, what is natural in language? We talk about patterns, we talk about uses, and we talk about a variety that is gonna live longer or less than we expect. And I don't used to fight with people on the internet, but I had like a wonderful opportunity to teach people. It's like, even if they are trolls, to tell them, okay, we have some uses. Maybe I believe that it's kind of ignorant part of themselves, so educate themselves is disgusting, but still disgusting is wasting, actually is the word. It's wasting maybe your time, but still you leave like a record of there is people advocating for the non-binary folks outside the, inside the platform. Okay, so the guiding questions of this project are basically, what is gender and why does it matter? And especially because, again, as I told at the beginning, not everybody knows about grammar, not everybody knows about linguistics, and none of them knows about gender at the end of the day. So we are here trying to make people gender literate about gender inclusive literate about their own biases. Also, think about the uses of speakers of uses of inclusive or non-binary forms from speakers of Spanish in Twitter, in press, and even institutionally, because we can have different sources of data and different perspectives there. Some of them are aligned, some of them are not. And also, this is not something I discovered 2-3 years ago. There are research about use and forms of Spanish, inclusive Spanish language. However, there are some limitations about those researches that I will discuss a little bit later, and how this use of inclusive non-binary language affect the additional and heritage language teaching and learning. The practitioner's perspective, the student perspective, and also the administrative use. So for this, in terms of data collection, we were collecting data from previous research using Gawa and all methodology in terms of collecting data from academic databases, then Google Scholar, international journals, and snowball sampling using the bibliography of the previous phases, so we can collect enough data and more representative data about the use of Spanish language in inclusively Spanish language in the classroom. So we have found so far in preliminary results that we have found just 22 research articles focused on empirical research with data and participants focused on Spanish inclusive language. And those studies are from 2019 up to 2023. Well, we don't have this year yet because I saw some publications there. I said, like, wonderful. We have more research about inclusive Spanish language and also empirical research using people. So we what we want is the speaker's perspective, the native speaker's perspective here, and the learner perspective as well. So in terms of collecting data from Twitter or X platform, this has been a little difficult because the change of Twitter to X and the new regulations about the use of the data, still we are developing the text analysis tools to grab information about the instances in which people use inclusive Spanish language. And we are focusing also on surveys and follow-up interviews. So far, I have interviewed quite a few organizations and one press institution, a feminist institution using Spanish inclusive language in their columns, in their use orally, used by written, has been insightful because depending on the zone you are, inclusive Spanish language may have a feminist focus or a queer focus. And it's something that is super interesting within the research. And there are uses according to that in the press, for instance. For instance, we have Volcánicas, that is a feminist group of journalists, and they use inclusive Spanish language regardless of their self-identified women. And also we have influencers that they don't have linguistic background, but however, they understand or describe the use of their own queerness and use of their own Spanish. And we have the use of, they explain ourselves, the Latinx or Latina use, and some other institutions. So this project will result on creating the repository, online repository for open educational resources, grammar booklets, considering the data patterns we found, the uses we have discussed in the interviews, and with potential implementation in additional language and heritage language classroom, and also best practices and guidelines for inclusive Spanish language in academic and non-academic purposes, administrative use, and also sample pedagogical units on how include the use of Spanish, inclusive Spanish language in your teaching. So in terms of administrative use, what we have found or we have proposed is including, besides the performative use of, I just add my pronouns and now I'm an inclusive person, use it for purposefully within the communications, within the greetings, within the materials we are sharing with our bilingual or monolingual communities who uses Spanish. And the pedagogical implementation, I have seen the previous presentation, I felt wonderful, and I need to talk with you later, but focusing this one is not in a language class. This is a general education class called Introduction to a General Education Experience, in which I propose piloting a bilingual version. And because I realized that in a Hispanic serving institution, we don't have bilingual courses, and we have 25% of the students that are Hispanic Latine, and also it doesn't mean that they speak Spanish, but they understand Spanish somehow, and they have some language maintenance there, and they have the bias of normative grammar, and when they arrive to university, they have another possibility. Not only translating the assignments, translating the materials, but also giving an inclusive and non-binary perspective of the use of Spanish. It has been awesome, trust me. And we have some opportunities and some challenges. Opportunities, social linguistic approaches.
Jhonatan, sorry to interrupt you. I'm just like 1 more minute, if that's okay. I think you're getting
Okay,
to the end.
yes.
Sorry,
This is again. Okay, thank you so much. My bad. So we have opportunities and challenges. Social linguistic approaches for second Spanish additional language, heritage Spanish language, are a wonderful source of inspiration and justification of this implementation. Also considering gender justice education approaches from nicely to 2023. Also, collaboration with LGBTQ plus centers within your institutions. They have the support, they have the connections, and even they are the platform I have been used since I started this project, creating open educational resources. We have the issue of publishers because we have kind of censorship, we have kind of politics within this, so complementing the publishers we use with these inclusive materials would be awesome. Professional development for our instructors, because they have to be trained, not just giving them the materials, but understanding what is going on. Reassessment of teaching material is an opportunity, but could be a challenge. State laws, what happened in Florida, what happened in Texas, what happened in Kentucky, in which you cannot use the X in official materials because they believe in the Real Academia Española, which is BS at the end of the day. And program politics. As you notice, I have supporters, and our university may be focused on other projects than inclusivity. So that's why I have to knock at the doors of other institutions, other departments to make this happen. So thank you so much. I have here some ongoing bibliography. It's growing up, this bibliography, thanks to you, this conference support. And gracias a todos. Thank you, everybody. And if you have any questions, remember you have the link, and you can follow updates on my Instagram or Twitter X account, Profe John, La E Inclusiva, and the repository I will share with you in the chat. Thank you so much again, and happy to hear your question and the other presentations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jhonatan. We're gonna turn it right over to Silvia. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm gonna share my screen. Just 1 second, and I will also set the timer for the 5 minutes. So 1 second. I just started the chat here. So I'm so happy to be here today. I'm gonna share about the resource that I am writing. It's an open educational resource, and it's a work in progress. I'm so happy to see it was in Mercedes and Ben's and Liana was who presented with you? Or not? Yes, and Liana's presentation. And as I said, it's in progress. So what is in the website, it was the first draft that I did before entering the CUNY Open Publishing Collective. That is, it's a current space of the CUNY at large for creating pedagogical materials. So during this semester, I have been working with them to understand how to make this material much more like pedagogical. And there have been like few spaces where I have been learning about this too. So everyone has a concept here and so on. So it can seem basic, but I want to understand or to share like the idea of gender inclusive language as diverse, discursive, and linguistic strategies pertaining to the broader social process for eradicating patriarchy in its bigger sense. It is a political stance developed by collectively by women and LGBTQ communities from their multiple subjectivities, and that's why we have a lot of political challenges. Jhonatan mentioned it a lot about a lot of them, particularly when he talked about the Real Academia Española, and the strategies take place in different geographies and bodies where they intertwine with the complexity of the intersectional and systemic forms of oppression, which is something like really important. And well, this is a cartoon of this is how I made a cartoon about this situation. I mean, like just these tensions that we see everywhere about it. And so the resource is created for language learners because as language instructors can have their own language policies for the class, the main idea is that the students can learn by themselves if they want to understand more about the topic, but the material can also be used in the classroom. While the classroom is a very important political space, there is also a need for resources that people can do or can take advantage of by themselves, and also to get empowered to be able to respond to the authority of the language instructors that can be very violent when they have like a very normative perspective on grammar. And the contents of the material are an introduction with the concepts of gender inequalities and gender identities, the basics of grammar, of Spanish as a gender language and how we embed or code the words and the difference between the grammatical gender and humans and the ideological perspectives on grammar, and then the political arena on the resistance and the activism that includes both feminist and LGBT communities, and then the Spanish strategies for gender fair language, or a perspective on this at least, and links to resources and the Spanish grammar and the US context. It is very specific, particularly thinking that I'm writing from New York, where the Spanish is very like central to our everyday life. And so I have these questions and I see the time, so I have like 1 minute. What do we teach when we teach gender inclusive language? It's very complicated, as you have seen, because for me, for example, it's not only teaching about, in the case of Spanish, the inclusion of people according to how they want to be named, also talking about the social movements that have made this to get to this point, and also the political institutions and neo-colonial institutions around Spanish. So it's something that is not for one class, it's not something that is just one topic, and it has to be across the language pedagogy. And also it's not for a specific level, and it's not like advanced. For example, like some people think about subjunctive in Spanish about a specific thing in the grammar. It has to be a practice. For me, as I said, the audience are the learners, as they have to make their own decisions. And then in the class, we also have like a lot of work we can do. I think gender inclusive language should not be the topic, but also sometimes we can have materials that are authentic materials of Spanish where we have gender inclusive language, but we can be using those materials to talk about other topics so that people get used to see these structures as part of our everyday practices, as they are for many of us. I was surprised to hear earlier today that for some people it's quite new, when like it has a long history, and there are materials with different forms for like over 20 years. So it's confusing still, even though, for example, the todes is like recently that has becoming more like general. Then I talk about the difficulties of the students and how they can be prepared for the situation. And then like, these are the references. I don't want to take more time than the one I have. So thank you so much. And I will be happy to have questions or to talk in that section.
Okay, thank you so much. That was impressive that you managed to like compress all of that in 5 minutes. Thank you, because we're back to like our original timing. We can turn to Belle. Hopefully, Silvia, we didn't constrain you too much, or we will be able to expand in the question period. But without further ado, Belle, if you want to go ahead with your presentation, thank you so much.
Yes, I want a clarification first, because I was under the impression that I had 15 minutes and now I am panicking.
No, I think you do have 15 minutes. You
Okay,
have 1
thank you.
5. So again, this is why I was
Okay.
saying, sorry, I hope we didn't constrain Sylvia too much, and hopefully if we
Yeah.
did, we'll be able to make up for
Yeah,
it
yeah,
some
thank you.
during the question section. I'm sorry.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that I didn't overextend myself. But yes, let me share my presentation, hopefully. Yeah, okay. So, right. Okay. Yeah, no, that is not going to work because then I cannot see my notes. So you're going to see it like this, okay? I'm sorry. Is this good? Okay. So I'm going to talk about challenging linguistic conservatism, and I'm going to address some of the questions that have already been risen. It's being super stimulating, so thank you all. My presentation has some pictures, mostly is to make it cute, but I will make some descriptions for the ones that have content that should be explained for those of you who might have like low vision or no vision at all. And I'll begin by describing myself. I have short purplish hair. I'm wearing a blue button-up shirt with tiny flower prints, and my background is very bland. It's my office at university, nothing interesting there. It's light gray. I would like to start by saying that I don't think of being non-binary, as being a non-binary person in terms of identity, but in terms of the kinds of the relationships that I want to establish or avoid with other people. So that makes the question that was earlier raised by one of the analysis that Liana was making about why don't you adjust your identity to my language, that makes that question irrelevant, because what I aim to achieve is a new interrelational paradigm that can be lived in any language, and it has nothing to do with my own gender identity, which is, again, irrelevant. I think more of gender as a power structure that I want to destroy. Okay, so in this first picture, this is the audience of the presentation of the first guide to non-binary language in Catalan. And some of the audience could be read as queer, and of course they have blue hair and pronouns, if we need to follow the meme. And here we have the Catalan grammar, the Catalan official grammar, next to this guide, Guia Gramatical del Llenguatge No Binari, grammatical guide to non-binary language in Catalan. This guide was so successful that they had to make a second edition within a few weeks of its publication. And this comes to show how, while Spanish and Catalan-speaking queer communities are being creative in finding ways to express dissident gender identities, even publishing books about it, linguistic authorities are pushing back against inclusive practices. We might encounter this pushback in our own department. So what I'm going to do is give, hopefully, a little toolkit for you to answer some of the critiques that might be presented to you. But first, let's have a look. We have talked about this a little bit, so I'm going to go over it very, very quickly. Some of the strategies to express non-binary realities. So first, it would be the indirect non-binary language, which is avoiding the use of grammatically gender words as codified by Artemis Lopez. And in terms of Westerning earlier today, that would be like gender neutral. So that would be using strategies that avoid gender. I think this is this has very important challenges, I think. One of them is that it's difficult to apply when referring to specifically to one person throughout a long text. So if I want to talk about myself for a long time, this is going to be very challenging. It's very difficult to use orally, though with practice, I have realized that you get to kind of, use it a lot. But the most important setback to me is that it renders gender nonconformity invisible. So is it really inclusive, or is it actually elusive? You are not including anyone. You're trying to avoid making it visible that you're including people. So in terms of Marquise Bay, in their book, Black Trans Feminism, that was published in 2022, we could say, we could go back to this idea of opacity and transparency of identities when they talk about Glissat. To be transparent and thus legible to the predominating schema of intelligibility, one must always have the breadth of their subjectivity reduced, destyled. One's differences that may fall outside of scripts of possibility, for instance, gender non-binariness, must be captured by the norm, linked to it in some way, which deprives the difference of something essential to it, right? So it's basically by erasing yourself that you are going to become intelligible. After this, we would have direct non-binary languages, which is using language that explicitly includes realities. This has already been discussed, and I'm just going to talk about some of the challenges. This is not applicable in Catalan because we have what is called morfema zero for the masculine. So what in Spanish would be contento, in Catalan would be content. We don't have an ending for the masculine in most words. We only have an ending for the feminine and for the plural. So that's just not applicable because you would have nothing to substitute if you were using these techniques. It's difficult or impossible to pronounce, or we have not reached a consensus on how to pronounce it. Some say that the arroba, the @ symbol, reinforces the binary because it looks like kind of an A or an O. And a part of the Latino community refuses the use of the X, and I'm not going to get into that because, again, time. And also it's very difficult to read by machines. And this is a problem for those with low vision or no vision at all, obviously. And I think this should be solved. Like technique is like, yeah, computers are being so advanced that I cannot even know if this is even an issue right now, or if we just want it to be an issue. But anyway. And then we would get to what I think is like more inclusive. That would be the direct non-binary language again. But in this case, it's this other strategy of the neomorpheme. And again, in terms of Westerning this morning, this would work both as gender affirming and gender possible language, because it doesn't invisibilize you, and it's at the same level as the other endings for words, for the masculine or the feminine in our language. And I would say, so some say it's difficult to implement orally particularly, but I have been using this for a few years in my everyday life, talking about myself, about my child, about a number of my friends. And I have to say that, yeah, it takes a little practice. Once you have a little practice, it's not that difficult. And so the only challenge that I really see here is people who are against it. And I know this is a big challenge when you're talking about people in power, particularly if they are your boss. But it's still like just one challenge in opposition to all of the other challenges that we have seen for other practices, which are obviously also facing this one. So who are these people who are against it? We have here a picture. On top is the members of Institut d'Estudis Catalans, which is the institution in charge of saying what is correct Catalan. And below we have the president of the Spanish government surrounded by members of the Real Academia Española de la Lengua, which is the same institution for Spanish. And in contrast with the Swedish Language Council, they have both issued statements reminding the public, and particularly the authorities and the press, that these practices fall outside of what is considered normative language and should therefore not be used in context aiming at correctness. And that is shooting at our, like, straight at us, no pun intended with a straight here, because yeah, we as language instructors, we should be aiming at correctness in some ways. None of these institutions, I want to say, have any members living openly outside of the cisgender binary, and that is important. That is relevant to the conversation also of how gender non-conforming people are excluded of certain debates, which is going to come up later as well. So what they claim, basically, if we analyze the works of Lopez and Santiago Alonso, is that the neomorpheme is a top-down imposition, that it isn't necessary because we already have a gender-neutral form, which would be the masculine, and also that the invention of a morpheme goes against the essence of language. Okay, so let's see how we can challenge those ideas. So first of all, it is true that some institutions have used it, and we have here a tweet by the ministry, the Catalan Ministry for Equal Rights. This was the first time that a lot of people read the neomorpheme in Catalan, but certainly not the first time it had ever been used. And it was used on Pride Day, right, on June the 28th in 2021. But before that could happen in 2021, a lot of other things had happened. I'm not going to go into the chronology in depth, but at least the neomorpheme had been used in Catalan for at least 10 years before it was used by the institutions, by the ministry, and in Spanish for even longer. So it just doesn't make sense that they would say that it's like a top-down imposition. It was rather the other way around, right? After the use of the ministry, though, there was a campaign started, well, most evidently by this person here, Carme Junyent in the picture. In this picture, this is a picture of a Catalan TV program in which Carme Junyent and I were debating or like giving our arguments for and against gender just language. And what happened, this picture is an exception because mostly only linguists who were against the neomorpheme were invited, or the neomorpheme or gender just language in general. So the theoretical erasure of non-binary people through the refusal and mockery of linguistic strategies that could render us visible conflates with the practical erasure of our presence in a debate in which we are at least as expert as binarists claim to be. So they are saying the only people who are experts are these people who are recognized by the academia, and at the same time, they are not inviting people in the academia who are for these practices and who are as much experts, if not more, on the subject. And then I would say that even if this was a top-down imposition, which I have, I think, abundantly proved that it's not, so what? There is an expressive need, and the new morpheme covers it. So I don't care where it comes from. This is something that is useful to speakers. And even if it was a top-down imposition, yeah, I would gladly take it. And here there is a picture of the Catalan president giving a prize to Judith Butler, which was quite a big deal. And also the press, yeah, they talk about it a lot. So yeah, it has become something for the institutions as well, when they think that this could help them in ways. Another of the ideas is that masculine is neutral, okay? So most linguists would state that both Spanish and Catalan masculine words function as epicene. So despite the fact that there is copious evidence against that idea. Masculine, so this is a statement by IEC, by the Catalan Institute of Language. Masculine is the gender that doesn't carry a gender mark in Catalan and can be used when referring generically to groups or individuals on the masculine as well as the feminine sex. I have a lot of issues with this, but let's try it. Let's be open about it. Authors like Eulàlia Lledó have written a lot of articles explaining how against masculine as not marked in terms of gender when used in generic instances, but this is even more absurd when referring to a specific person. If I say, ahir vaig veure el meu pare, ayer vi a mi padre, I saw my father yesterday, this is unequivocally gendered, and every single Catalan speaker will think that I have a father who is a man, and that be not only confusing, but plain wrong if my parent is a non-binary person or a woman. So no use in the singular when referring to a specific person. And even when used in a generic way, as in the sentence, man is a wolf to man, the masculine form could be interpreted to refer to someone of an undetermined gender. The masculine form cannot be used when referring to a specific person of any gender other than masculine. We see, for instance, that when Judith Butler goes to Barcelona, which happens quite often, or Kate Tempest, who is also a favorite poet of us, visits Barcelona, they are gendered by the press in the feminine, even when the press states that they are non-binary people. If the masculine was really neutral, they would be gendered in the masculine and not in the feminine. And you obviously know why they are being gendered in the feminine, so I'm not gonna spend more time talking about it. And then Fabregas came up with an idea that I find is very interesting, that is that masculine might be neutral, but never non-binary. So in terms of gender, inclusive gender is different from neutral. Inclusive gender does not equal an absence of gender traits, but it equals another kind of gender or another kind of relationship to gender. Another argument that what I like to call extremist binarists like to use is that this is not proper grammar. And we have here like, sorry, statements by IEC, the Institute of Catalan Studies, saying that the new morpheme contravenes internal rules of Catalan, or Henao-Muñoz just mentioned earlier how RAE was saying some strategies are alien to Spanish language system, referring to the new morpheme. But I would argue that gender agreement is a basic element of both Catalan and Spanish, and it's key to assessing students' proficiency. And in no way is it alien to the essence of our languages, on the contrary. And furthermore, it comes to happen that this the use of the new morpheme actually is very queer, but it follows a lot of rules. And we have here this sentence by Fábregas: inclusive gender in Spanish behaves like any other grammatical feature and has internal rules that determine its distribution, its interpretation, and the syntactic processes it entails, like any other grammatical feature in Spanish. Or here by Gian Matteo saying the use of inclusive forms concerns only some nouns, pronouns, and adjectives, modifying their concordances, but leaving the rest of language unchanged. Okay, and I still have like 1 minute. If we are not convinced by all this, we even have more reasons, right? If we need some. The only way for non-binary people to render our identity intelligible is through a sustained set of acts posited through the stylization of the speech gendered outside of the binary, if we want to paraphrase Butler. We cannot leave gender and the social interactions it affects outside of language practices. So if you deny us these language practices, we just cannot implement not only our identities, but the social relationships that we want to establish. In cases of lesser spoken languages like Catalan, more flexible uses could prevent linguistic desertion. I'm certainly going to use Spanish because I can, and most people who speak Catalan can use Spanish if it's more flexible than my own language. Also, it is a Title IX violation to misgender people in academic and work environments. This is my alarm asking me to shut up. So yeah, let's avoid violating Title IX, please. Particularly if there's a gender imbalance. The implications for mental health have already been addressed today. Also, as I said earlier, we need to prepare students for real life language. Books, interviews, TV shows already use non-binary language. Introducing the new morphemes allows for elaborate meta-linguistic discussions, which is also beneficial to our students and to our practice. And even if not yet accepted by RAE or IEC or other linguistic authorities, these institutions tend to include well-established linguistic uses and not ones that we are still discussing. So they should not condition the conversation. We cannot stop having the conversation just because it's not accepted, because it will not be accepted until we have the conversation. And finally, I would say queers will be queered. So it's very naive to think that people who are very actively breaking every single gender rule in the world are going to stop using the language that we need to use, no matter how many rules language academies throw at us. And that's all I had to say for now. Thank you.